So when discussing the world trade equilibrium, we're going to be using the concept called an import demand and an export supply curve. So I'd like to quickly review how these two curves are generated using the domestic supply and demand. So on this left-hand side, we're going to be looking at this from the importer standpoint. And so what I have here is the domestic supply curve and the domestic demand curve. And where the supply and demand curves meet is the autarky price. So any price below that will create a situation of excess demand. So at price P0, there is no imports that are demanded from this country. So if I look over here on the import demand schedule, at price P0, there are no imports that the country wants to bring in. As soon as the price gets below that, say P1, you're going to have excess demand, which potentially could be met by importing this product. So this distance at this price P1, we're going to translate over here. So at this price P1, we've got this much demand from this country. If the price goes down to say P2, then we're going to demand this amount from the country. So if we bring back P2 over here, we now have a new amount. And this distance is equal to that distance. So this is translating this information into this graph. And if we connect all these different possible quantities that the country wants to import at different prices, what we're going to get is the import demand curve. So again, that is generated from this set of relationships. Okay? Now, let's take a look at this from the exporting country's standpoint. So it's going to be exactly the same kind of relationship. We've got price and we've got quantity. We've got a domestic supply over in this market. So this is an entirely separate country. We've got the domestic supply and domestic demand for this country. And let's say at price P2, demand equal to supply. And if the price were, say, P1, you would have this much excess supply. And at P0, you would have this much excess supply. So I want to translate this into an export supply relationship. So at price P2, there is no amount that this country is willing to supply onto the international market. At price P1, we have this amount. At price P0, we've got that amount. And if you connect all of those amounts, those quantities, all different possible prices, it's going to start at P2 and expand. Now, if you put these two curves together, I'm going to draw this using the blue. Okay, so I'm taking this and putting it on this curve. Where these two lines cross at P1 is where the amount that this country wants to supply on the international market equals the amount that this country is demanding. And that's going to be the trading equilibrium for these two countries. So in most of the courses, I'm going to be dealing with what happens internally in the exporting market, if you've got a change in policy, or the import market, using the supply and demand curves for the, actually I should put this up again, the supply and demand curves from the importing country's standpoint. But in the background is this export supply and import demand relationship. Okay, so always keep this in mind. So, for example, if there is something that causes the demand for imports from this country, the importing country, to, say, rise, let's say that there is a boom-like conditions, strong economic growth within the importing country, that can shift out the import demand curve and potentially raise the international price of this product. So, if you think about, for example, the growth of China, China has, as it's grown, has wanted to import many basic commodities that are used in the production of goods that China subsequently exports, or for Chinese domestic consumption. That increase in the demand in China will shift this import demand curve out and increase the world price. The same way, if you had something that increased the supply in the international market, that will tend to lower the price. Okay, so we'll use these export supply and import demand curves a few times. It's also in the textbook, so I wanted to make sure that you had a good sense of that going forward.